Chapter 58. Saul's wrath. David came to Ahimelech, the priest of Nob. He asked for food, and Ahimelech gave him some of the hollowed bread. Because he had no weapons, Ahimelech brought out the sword of Goliath, which lay wrapped in a cloth, and said, "If you want this sword, it is yours, for it is the only one here." So David took the sword of Goliath, the Philistine whom he had slain, but as he was afraid of the wrath of Saul, he went and hid in the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and all his father's house heard that he was there, they came to him, and everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him. He became a captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. One of the foremost herdsmen of Saul, Doeg the Edomite, was at Nob. When David visited the priest Ahimelech, he came to Saul and told him how the priest gave unto David food and a sword. When he saw this, Saul sent to Nob and commanded Ahimelech and all his family to come before him. When they came to him, Saul said, "Why have you conspired against me with the son of Jesse and given him bread and a sword? And why did you intercede with the Lord for him against me? Ahimelech answered, "You have no more faithful subject than David. Is he not your son-in-law, obedient to your bidding and honoured in your house? Did I intercede with the Lord for him? Never. Let not the king impute such a thing to his servant, nor to all the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing about this matter, and pleads his innocence." The king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." And he said to the soldiers who stood beside him, "Kill the priests of the Lord, for they are friends of David, and they knew when he fled, and did not tell me." But the servants of the king would not slay the priests of the Lord. So the king said to Doeg the Edomite, "Fall upon the priests of the Lord, they are enemies to me." So Doeg the Edomite turned and fell upon the priests, and on that day he slew 85 of them, and he attacked the city of Nob and killed everything inside it. Only one of the sons of Ahimelech, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. He told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priests. David said, "I knew it that day that Doeg the Edomite would certainly tell Saul, so I am responsible for the death of all the members of your father's household, or your father's house. You must stay with me, and do not be afraid, for he who threatens my life threatens your life. But with me you will be well guarded and protected." Chapter 59. David and Abigail. Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together to lament him, and he buried him in the house of Ramah. And David arose and went to the wilderness of Paran. There was a man in Moab who owned land in Carmel. His name was Nabal, of the house of Caleb, and he was very rich. He had 3,000 goats and 1,000 sheep, and his sheep were shorn in Carmel. His wife was called Abigail, and she was wise and beautiful, but Nabal was churlish and evil in his doings. In the wilderness David heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep, so he called out 10 of his young men and said to them, "Go to Carmel and greet Nabal from me, and say to him, 'Peace be to you and your house and all that you have. We have not harmed your shepherds while they were shearing near us in Carmel, nor have we stolen anything. So find favour with these young men, and pray unto them for themselves and for your son David.'" The young man came and repeated this to Nabal, but he answered, "Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? Many servants break away from their masters nowadays, and shall I take my bread and water and the meat that I have killed from my shearers, and give to these men whom I have known nothing?" The young men went back to David and told him that they had feared. And David said, "Gird on your swords." He also girded on his sword, and the 400 men went with David, leaving 200 behind to look after their goods. But one of Nabal's young men told Abigail about this, saying, "David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, but he insulted them. But they were very good to us, nothing was stolen, and nobody was hurt. And they were like our defenders during the time that we were together in the fields. What can we do now, for they are marching against our master? But he is such an evil man that nobody can speak to him." Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep already cooked and 5 measures of parched corn and 100 bunches of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and loaded them on asses. And she said to her servants, "Go on ahead of me and I shall follow." But she said nothing of this to her husband. As she rode on the ass, she met David and his men, and alighted from her ass and fell at David's feet and bowed to the ground before him and said, "Listen, I beseech you, to the words of your handmaid, Pay no heed to this Nabal, this son of Belial, for he is a fool. I did not see the young men whom you sent, but I beg of you not to shed blood nor to avenge yourself upon your enemy, for the Lord will fight your battles, even as you fight the battles of the Lord. And in the day of your triumph I implore you to remember your handmaid." David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel for sending you here, and blessed be your counsel. Had you not come, I would surely have slain Nabal and all his household. Then he accepted her gifts and said, "Go in peace to your own house, for I will heed your advice." Abigail went to Nabal, who was holding the feast. He was drunk, so she told him nothing of what had happened. But the next morning, when he was sober, she told him, and Nabal's heart fainted within him, and he became a stone. And it came to pass that about 10 days later, the Lord smote Nabal, and he died. Now David heard that Nabal was dead. He praised God and sent forth Abigail, intending to marry her, for Saul had given David's wife Michal in marriage to Phalti, the son of Laish. When Abigail heard that David wished to marry her, she bowed her face to the ground and said, "Let me be a handmaid to wash the feet of the servants of my lord." Then she mounted an ass, taking 5 girls with her, and went with the message of David and became his wife. David spared Saul's life. David arose one night and came to where Saul had set up his tent. David saw the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the captain of his army, lay beside him. Saul lay in the middle of the camp, and his men were encamped around him. So David took the spear and the jug of water from beside Saul's pillow, and stole away, and no man saw him or knew that he was there or waked up, for they were all asleep. A deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. Then David went and stood on top of the hill far off, a long distance from the camp. David cried to the people and to Abner, saying, Are you not a courageous man who is like you in Israel? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not protected the Lord your king? For one of the people came to destroy the king your lord. Look now for the king's spear and the jug of water that was beside his pillow. Then Saul knew David's voice and said, Is that your voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my lord, O king. And he added, Why does my lord persecute his servant this way? What have I done? What is evil within me? And Saul said, I have sinned, return to me, my son David, for I will never more do you any harm, because my life was precious to you this day. I see now that I have been foolish and very wrong. Then Saul blessed David, and David went on his way, and Saul returned to the palace. Chapter 59. Saul and the Spirit of Samuel. Now the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem. Then Saul gathered all Israel together and pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. But when Saul questioned the Lord answered him not. Then Saul said to his servant, Seek me a woman that is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said, There is a woman that is a medium at Andor. So Saul disguised himself and came to the woman by night. He said to her, I pray you, bring forth the spirit whose name I shall give you. Then the woman said, Whom shall I bring up to you? And he said, Bring me Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice and spoke to Saul, saying, Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. The king said to her, Be not afraid. What did you see? What is he like? She said, An old man, and he is covered with a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel. And he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. And Samuel said to Saul, Why have you disturbed me? Saul said, I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me and no longer answers me. Therefore I have called you that you may make known to me what I shall do. And Samuel said, Why do you ask me, seeing that the Lord has departed from you, and has become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me. He has broken up your kingdom and given it to your neighbour, to David. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hands of the Philistines. And tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. Then Saul fell on the earth and was much afraid because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all day nor all night. The woman saw that he was troubled and said to him, Let me set a morsel of bread before you and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way. But he refused and said, I will not eat. Then his servants, together with the woman, compelled him to eat. He arose from the earth and sat upon a bed. Saul and his servants ate. Then they rose to gather their things and went away in the night. Saul kills himself. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, amen. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines, and were slain by their own Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed closely after Saul and his sons, and Saul himself was hard pressed in the battle and severely wounded by the Philistine archers. And Saul said to his armour bearer, Draw your sword and run me through with it, lest these heathen kill me and then dishonour my body. But his armour bearer dared not do such a thing. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when the armour bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with his king. So Saul perished with his 3 sons and his armour bearer and all his men on that same day together. And when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley and the other side of Jordan, saw that Saul and his sons were dead, his army defeated, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. David's lament for Saul and Jonathan. When David learned of the death of Saul and Jonathan, he tore his clothes and fasted, and so did all the men who were with him. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And David lamented this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. The beauty of Israel is slain upon thy high places. How are thy mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for the shield of the mighty is violently cast away. The shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty. The bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle, O Jonathan, thou wast slain. In thine high places I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished. And it came to pass, after this, the Lord told David to go up to Hebron. So he took his people, every man with his household, and he led them across the plain and into the city. There they anointed him king over the house of Judah. But Abner, the son of Ner, captain of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead, and over the Asherites, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and reigned 2 years, but David and the house of Judah were stronger than they.